Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is, can you see me now? My name is Chege from the Internet Society. I work for the Africa Regional Bureau. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. This is my, I think, second SAFNOG meeting, and also my, I think, third ION, I'm not sure. I always find them very interesting. So now we're going to have an IPv6 panel discussion. We were to have 3 panelists, but we have 2 panelists who I believe can cover a 3-hour event, so I think we are well in the green in that front. It'll be an interactive session, so anytime you have a question, feel free to walk to any of the mics, okay? So first of all, we'll start with introductions, although these gentlemen don't need any introductions, but we'll start with introductions. We have Andrew and Mark. Maybe Mark, because you have the mic, you can start first, and then Andrew.
I'm Mark.
From where?
Okay, no, more seriously, I'm Mark Elkins. I've been around on the internet landscape for the last 23, 30 or something, I don't know, years. All started with something called UUCP, and I've been, it's something that I enjoy, and I've been involved with the internet industry. Both from a CCTLD or almost a CCTLD running domain name systems to a registrar to a registrant, all sorts of things.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm Liquid's group head of IP strategy. Been around on the internet scarily enough, now that I think about it, 26 years since I was sneaking into academic institutions to get internet access and running up huge phone bills on dial-up systems. But yeah, and I head up strategy with regards to IP on the Liquid Telecom network for the group.
Thank you, Mark and Andrew. So we'll get going with the first question. So we'll go through a round of questions, then open up to the floor for those who want to ask them direct questions. So I'll start with you, Mark. You mentioned that you had IPv6 several years back. What motivated you to move to IPv6 or consider actually deploying IPv6 in your infrastructure?
Well, okay. So initially we were playing around on when we had this 3FFE address system, and eventually that closed down. It was more of a curiosity as much as anything. It was the future, but eventually it closed down. So a little bit more on the history on that, and answering this question more precisely. Also being involved in the co.za domain name system, and it was only that at that point, what we could see is that IPv6 was definitely going to happen. It was going to happen within the next 2 or 3 or 4 years from when we were doing this. So back in around about 2006, I went to, we saw that from a domain name point of view, we needed to have IPv6 access and the ability for people to add IPv6 glue records into the domain name system in the same way that you have IPv4 glue records. And we didn't want to be a barrier to stopping people adopting IPv6. So essentially that was what the motivation was. And continuing the story a little bit, so in November 2006, there was an Afrinic meeting in Mauritius, and there was no policy though the only thing you could get was a /32, and Afrinic had just started doing that. But that was it. It was a 32 or nothing. But Uniforum at that time was already connected at Jinx, and it was connected to a couple of other different service providers. So it already had its own unique IPv4 address base and ASN, and it didn't make sense to have a 32. But there was no policy for a 48, a /48. So I started writing a policy for a /48 and pushed that in. So at that meeting, I was pushing for /48s to happen. There was a gentleman from the United States that decided that I was totally and utterly wrong, which basically sunk that policy at the meeting. It had to be extended for another 6 months. But in the meantime, I had got a /32. I got the /32. Well, I applied for it around about the time of the meeting, and by the first few days of Jan, I had it. And then I assigned /48 to Uniforum, the COSA registry people. And so Uniforum at least had an IPv6 from back there. The domain name system, long before EPP, was extended to allow for IPv6 glue records, and then we also configured the DNS servers to actually answer on IPv6. So, and the machines were given IPv6, so you could actually do anything and everything with COSA on IPv6 from probably about February, March 2007. Later on in June 2007, next AFRINIC meeting, and that dear little American person wasn't there, and we were able to push through the /48 policy. So, sorry? Come on, I can see smiles in the room. Everyone knows who I'm talking about. So that was the problem, and that was the challenge, and that was the motivation.
Thanks, Mark. Andrew?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit in history here and say something that's probably a bit shocking. Most of my career, as it sits today, I can trace back to say thanks to IPv6. To tell the story, I found myself working for the University of Cape Town back probably about 2004, 2005. And I'd heard about this thing called IPv6, and I thought, well, this is worth playing, and guess what? I wanted. So I went to Tenet, the South African NREN, and I said, hi, University of Cape Town wants IPv6, and they looked at me and went, yeah, if you want it, you'll have to do it yourself. And so we put in some FreeBSD boxes, and I did some hacking to the GRE code in the FreeBSD kernel to make it work, and we rolled out IPv6, and well, long story, but one thing after another. On the basis of that, I actually found myself working at Tenet as Tenet CTO for the next 6 or 7 years, and from there branched out into Liquid. Now, in my experience in that and watching how much we managed to get done, that V6 drive also, I brought that into Liquid as well. Liquid was already doing IPv6 before I got there. Just for the record, I was not the guy who brought V6 to Liquid. That was on the network, and I think a lot of it had to do with a particular customer that wanted it, thanks to Mark telling them that they had to get it. But from a Liquid perspective, we know that V4 is coming to an end. V4 is going to be extremely expensive if I've got to buy in the secondary market. The AFRINIC pool on V4 is limited, and even with it not being limited, getting space, I don't know anybody who's done an IPv4 application lately, but wow, what a process. And so my simple view is that V6 is no longer even a separate part of the network. It's just part of what we do. Just like I need ISIS, just like I need V4 addresses in certain parts, just like I need BGP, I need IPv6. It's just another building block. And so I don't think there's any more real motivation anymore, because it's a fundamental part of what we do. It is ingrained in everything. We don't consider a network a full network without IPv6 anymore.
Thanks, Mark and Andrew. One of the reasons people put up as reasons, I have them called as excuses in the morning, why they've not moved to IPv6, is that they fear the challenges that come with IPv6 in terms of migrating equipment, doing the dual stack, doing the DNS, and so on. What would you say to people trying or people planning to move to IPv6? What are the challenges they would expect? What are the what's the planning they need to put into place? What would you advise them from your experience?
Okay, so firstly, to the people who are scared of challenges, get out of the industry. Sorry to say that bluntly, but we don't work in a simple industry. You know, this is an industry that will throw you challenges every day. Customers are going to ask for some very difficult things. They're going to ask for things they don't quite understand some of the time, and you're going to have to make a plan. IPv6 is no different from that. With regards to specifics, though, for years and years, even in the V4 world, people have not planned their address space. That is important. If you don't plan your address space, you will run into really major headaches. You've got a vast amount of address space, and, well, most people don't count very well in hexadecimal. So you tend to see that, you know, people haven't realized that after 9 doesn't come 10, after 9 comes A. And so you see some really, really interesting things appearing on the network because people aren't planning it properly before they go out and deploy, and you end up with ranges all over the place. With regards to the dual stacking, you shouldn't hit a problem dual stacking unless you've done something really broken because they run as separate stacks. Obviously, if you're running like we are with single topology, what you could find is if you don't do your V6, then the V4 adjacency is not going to form in your IGP. You know what? That's exactly the way it should be. Because that way you know that they both work. But my message to people is stop treating V6 like some special holy cow. If you treat it like just another building block, you're not going to see all of these mythical challenges that people keep claiming because they aren't there. It's just another part of the network.
So what challenges did I have? From my own company at the time, no problems at all, because I knew the manager, the owner of the company pretty well, and we both agreed when I looked in the mirror. So that wasn't a problem. So I didn't have that manager saying no type problem. The biggest problem from getting the appropriate address space from the uniform registry point of view was there was no policy, so the AfriNIC at the time couldn't actually give me what we were asking for. So that was probably the biggest problem there. But the meeting that, I think it was in June 2007, I think that was the meeting in Morocco, Rabat or something. And at that meeting, I was able, or maybe it was the meeting after that, but it was one of those meetings that, the other excuse, dress planning, I actually gave a talk on address planning, on how I would use my /32, how it would be regionalized for aggregation from a district, from a regional point of view, etc. And so these weren't challenges as in something that you had to climb over. These were challenges in how I would help teach other people, I would like to think. So from my point of view, there weren't too many challenges apart from having a policy suitable so that we could actually apply for the address space we wanted.
Andrew?
Just to add one other thing, that is the one thing that I do think I need to raise as a potential challenge. In a large organization, you've got a lot of engineers, and you've got to convince those engineers of the value of what you're doing, because even at a management level, you can push down and say, do this, do this, do this. But if you don't get them interested and let them see the value of it, be it financial or be it a case where they can prove that they can do something that other people can't, whatever it is, you're going to run into problems. Because engineers like to keep their life simple. And there is a lot of view that, well, why am I doing this? Who cares? It's a second-class citizen. And so you need to find a way to constantly engage the engineers and keep them interested. And I still struggle with that. It's not the easiest thing to do, to stop engineers believing that V6 is a second-class citizen. Hence, again, why we run single topology, because it forces it.
Okay, so we've had, what your motivations have been and some of the challenges and how you've overcome them. A lot of questions I get from the engineers I meet also revolves around costs. So we've heard about the costs of what it's going to take to keep IPv4 for the next few years. What are the costs related for those who want to move on to IPv6? Are there any costs related to actually moving to IPv6? What would you consider? I see someone at the mic. Is it a question related to? Okay, let's take that question first.
It's in a sense related to your question around cost.
Introduce yourself.
Sorry, my name's Graham from the Internet. Graham Benneker from the Internet. It is in a sense related to your question around cost. My experiences with IPv6 in the last year or two have been largely dealing with enterprise users, large business users with a large internal network that I as the ISP don't have an insight into. So my question is kind of quite broadly, in your experiences of rolling out IPv6, it's easy when you control the infrastructure, when you are the customer, when you are the one doing the implementation on the end device. In an environment like a university, you also very much control all the way down to the LAN. But on the one hand, in sort of getting into the mindset of the engineers in the enterprise space, what have you seen in terms of driving factors, enterprises demanding IPv6? Have you seen enterprise demanding IPv6? And on the other side of it, do you see that the costs are being prohibitive for them, or do you see that they're not wanting to do it as a result?
Okay, so here's what I see as a problem with a lot of the enterprises, particularly the larger ones. They've got V4 space. They run much more static networks than your typical operator do, so they're not needing more and more V4 space. So they're not seeing the risk of run out of V4 space. What they see is, this works. And so you run into a case of why change this? So that's thing number one. It's not really a cost issue. It's a case of don't change what works. The other thing that I've seen which has caused a number of issues is the fact a lot of big enterprises are running on L3 VPN networks. And V6 and L3 VPNs have not always gelled so nicely for all the reasons I spoke about earlier with regards to MPLS and V6. That's changing, but I think it's a case of you've got to talk to your customer. You can never force a customer to take something, right? I can't walk onto their network and deploy it, and I can't force them to take it. But it's a matter of talking to them constantly. Are we getting enterprises asking for V6? One or two, but not many. That's a matter of education. It's about constantly talking to the customer and finding a way to convince them. If anybody's got a solution on the easy way to convince an enterprise to do this when they don't actually see a financial benefit to it, please let me know, because I haven't found it yet, but we're going to keep trying.
Yes, if it works, why change it? People hate change, and that's probably the biggest issue. If you've already got enough address space and it's working fine, there is no incentive. In the case of Uniforum, and I used Uniforum because that was the name of the organization at the time, the incentive to move was to make sure that we were not an artificial barrier to other people wanting to do it. So we were looking at reputation. From a cost point of view, I don't know that I ever spent any money for either myself or Uniforum in deploying IPv6. In fact, I think the first recordable time I actually spent or bought something is recently, a few weeks ago, I wanted IPv6 at home. The modem that I was using was 10 years old or something. It had never been hit by lightning, because I also make sure that doesn't happen. And that actually became a problem because the modem couldn't do V6. So I had to go out and buy a 300 Rand modem that could do IPv6 tunnels. So in order to get the Hurricane Electric tunnel to work, I think that's the only time I've actually gone to the shops to buy money to get kit so that I can run IPv6.
Andrew?
Just one other note about cost. I wouldn't say that we spent a lot of money doing IPv6. Where we have been cases where we haven't asked for it in the beginning because of mistakes or lack of knowledge on people who were buying things or whatever it was. In most cases where those situations have cropped up, we've had big fights with vendors and managed to get them to do it for free. I will say, as a warning to people out there, dependent on the vendor, and particularly if you are buying from certain Far East vendors who will remain unnamed, if you do not ask for V6 up front, they will deliver your hardware, it will not have it, and when you ask for it, you will be facing a massive license fee. If you ask for it up front, though, there's no cost to it whatsoever because they want the sale. But don't ask for it afterwards because you'll end up paying. So that's my warning. You've got to make sure that when you buy something, you actually explicitly put it in there, because otherwise you will get it later, but it's going to cost you. So that's the only time where there's cost. Otherwise, everything supports it. It's there.
There is a cost, though. The cost is time, and the cost is sitting down and making sure that wherever you currently collect an IPv4 address from a logs point of view, that space in the database is big enough for an IPv6 address. Or explicitly, wherever you push out an IPv4 address for a customer, you also can do the same with V6. So there are costs involved, but it's human costs. And it doesn't matter when you start, you're going to have those costs. And I would, if you don't do IPv6 today, I would be more concerned about how much it is going to cost you if you don't do it.
Before you answer, I see Mukoma has been standing for a long time. Let's hear, maybe it's related to this. Mukom, please.
Yeah, Mukom, I'm from Afrinic Limited. So the last contribution that Andrew made kind of spoke to what I had in mind and what happens with legacy equipment, particularly large blocks of it that gets bought by organizations. Now, all of you at some point, your equipment was not always IPv6 compliant. So I'm curious, when you got rid of equipment that is not V6 compliant, what do you do with it?
In most cases, you upgrade the software. You don't necessarily have to replace the hardware. Otherwise, standard hardware is depreciated, normal disposal mechanisms. There's nothing special about this. I don't replace hardware because it doesn't support V6. I tell the vendor to give me a new version of code and I fight for it until I get it. You know what I mean? I don't think I can point to a case of hardware that I've actually deliberately replaced because of V6. And then it's just stock standard, hardware gets replaced, hardware gets recycled, I send it back to the stores, and what they do with it, I don't know. That's...
Now, that part, I think it's important that you get to know, because typically, what I've seen countries where there's a big market for second-handed electronic equipment and devices like this. Sometimes they get donated to universities. And you have a poor network engineer in a university that wants to deploy IPv6. He can't get equipment because there's a donation of equipment, and that's just doomed. And the second question, if you've got any advice for those operators that made the mistake of not demanding V6 for large blocks of purchases, and only thought about that because I have at least 2 operators that are in that exact same problem. We went through V6 deployment, they actually tested it on a mobile phone, did a launch where the company CEO came out, we are launching IPv6. 2 weeks later, they launched their LTE product, and the CPE 0v6. and it's been like that. So if there's some advice you can offer to those guys, that really would be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, I can give you advice on that very simply. You go to the vendor and go, I've rolled an LTE network, I'm going to be needing a lot more hardware. You either fix what's there, or I'm going elsewhere for what's coming. And if need be, you run a tender and you go and buy something else. Doesn't even have to be a lot, just to demonstrate the point. Your vendors will come around pretty fast. Trust me on this, they don't want to lose. And then the only other thing that I wanted to say is, Mark, you and I agree on most things, but I disagree with you on the human cost side of things. And I'll tell you why. In running any network, there is a cost in running a network. And if we're going to say that we are treating V4 and V6 the same way, and they're building parts of the same network, and you run it as a completely, as symbiotic to one another, the amount of time is the same as running the other network. It's one network. It's not a case of vast amount of time invested in trying to add things and develop things and maintain two separate networks. It's not. It's one network. So, I mean, if I look in our Zimbabwe V6 deployment, where we've got tens of thousands of users, there's no extra time load involved in there. Yeah, there was a week or two to add to modify the systems, but it was minimal. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not what I would call real time.
Yes, but it does happen. If you were listening and awake at the time when Martin Levy was doing his remote presentation, choosing my words.
Presentation. Get your heads out of the gutter, please.
Presentation. Then what you did hear him say is they eventually removed the switch that said no IPv6, so that everything was IPv6. And the eyeballs were quite happy, it made no difference. On the other hand, it broke stuff in the back. It broke the logging stuff. So there is a cost, there is a development cost. Maybe it needs to be brought to consideration.
Maybe I can add, in my days when I was a network engineer at Kenneth, we were running OSPF at the time, and when we decided to move to V6, there was a whole reconfiguration of the routers to add the OSPF v3, and we had to do it for like 120 routers. So there was a small cost in terms of time, not money, but staff time. Someone has to sit down, make sure all the configs are okay, everything works, and so on. I want to touch on something you've mentioned, Andrew, about businesses and the corporates. I know corporates spend a lot of time planning for business continuity, like disaster recovery and so on. My expectation would be involving, planning for IPv6 would be part of that business continuity, because as we know, it's a matter of time before V6 is actually a must. So would you say that would be a motivation that Liquid could use to get more people on board, get more people encouraged to, move to V6?
It's an incredibly hard argument to make, surprisingly. And you see, for us as operators, we see that as an easy argument because, well, we're going to run out of V4. But these corporates have V4, and they're not opening tens of thousands of branches all over the place. They've got enough for their needs. And the reality is that, yes, we all know that sooner or later something's going to go V6 only. But they'll turn around and they'll go, well, by that point, there'll be NAT 6.4. There'll be 464 XLAT. And the transition mechanisms that we've come out with, I would argue, have probably hurt the deployment of V6 more than anything. It's the same way that NAT in itself, NAT 4.4, has hurt the deployment of V6. I can tell you now, had we not had NAT 4.4, we'd all be running V6 10 years ago because, well, there'd have been no other option. And that's why that argument is so damn difficult to make, because the reality is, does a corporate that is running V4 that can translate it really need it when they're not running out? Probably not, sadly. We've got to be honest about that. They probably don't. It's the operators that need it, and the people who are expanding and the new companies, but the current corporates who are happy with what they've got, it's not a need at this point.
Want to say something, Mark? Okay. Just a reminder to the audience, anytime you have a question, comment, please feel free to walk to the mic. It's an interactive session.
And if anyone wants to throw things at me for that last comment, feel free.
Aim at Andrew, don't hit me, please. Yes, Graham.
Graham from the internet. Just to respond to your question about business continuity and those sort of things. Business continuity is always, it comes under the insurance grudge purchase column. And so businesses are always looking for ways to avoid it. They are going to try and rationalize their way out of any expenditure there that goes beyond, or not even expenditure, any effort there that goes beyond the bare minimum, potentially statutory requirement for that business. And so my experience is that for something as abstract as IPv4 and IPv6, the banks have to have backups of all of their tapes. And in many countries it's a statutory requirement, and they understand that, and the Reserve Bank or the banking authority or whatever imposes it on that. But IP and internet is already so abstract for these decision makers, trying to equate IPv4 and IPv6 that they already can't tangibly grapple with IPv4. It's a bit of a lost cause in my experience, because they just, you're asking them to make a grudge purchase on something that they don't understand, and so their default is going to be to just reject it.
Thanks, Graham. Okay, someone else come to the mic. Moko.
Are you two alternating, taking turns or something? Where's the rest of the people?
No, Andrew did ask that we could throw things at him, so I brought some things to throw at you. Now, I think based upon the survey results we had, I think there's a big correlation between what you said for enterprise networks, and the exact wordings we had was, you know what, this is not a problem, it's not a priority. We have IPv4. We haven't even used the v4 that we got. And those were like, word verbatim responses for that.
You should be reclaiming that if they're saying that. That's the athletic rules.
Well, I did promise that the answers and their names will remain. I won't share them with Avenue Registration Services Department. Now, there's something else I want to ask your opinion about, because some of the guys that we've trained, and a couple of them after trainings have come back to us, we've deployed IPv6. And every single time, there's been, 3 or 4 people that did it on the core, never on the access network, and never to the content network. And every single time I asked them, he said, you know what, Taman, if it's the core network, I and my 4 guys, we can do this. But for the access network, that's a big ball of other stuff that's outside of my control. What advice do you have for guys like this?
You want to take this first? Okay, no, let me try and address this. Firstly, as I said, you've got to get your engineers across the company wanting this. We talk about having a champion in a company to champion V6, and it's something that's preached all over the place. But you know what? The problem is how people view that champion. They view it as the guy who's got to do it all. That is not the role of a champion. The role of the champion is to get other people interested enough to do it. He is a means to delegate down. And the guys that you are training, their job is not to go and roll it all the way to the access network. Their job and what they need to be taught is to take what they've been trained and skill out across the organization and build that interest and build that desire. If I look at our own V6 rollout, I did the BRASs, I made sure that a lot of the core stuff, and I worked very closely. But without my guys on the ground, guys like Anthony Somerset in Zimbabwe, and guys like Tanashi, and my guys at Zimbabwe Online who put a lot of effort in, and the developers, etc., it wouldn't have happened. I had to work with them, encourage them, make them interested. You cannot rely on one person that you've trained to go and roll it out. He's got to be trained. The only reason you're training him is so that he can train everybody else. That's his job as a champion, to bring other people to the table. Because if you don't do that, you're never going to get it to the edge. Not in a big network. There are too many people involved, too many parts.
And don't you think that that's where the role of their manager comes in? Because a champion is not just, push it down, but also play the politics, getting peers and protection.
But the champion's role is also not just to push it down. He's got to push it up as well.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to say.
You've got to get these guys talking and talking and talking, and they've got to fight. They've got to have big mouths like me and not shut up until people listen.
It has to be in the genes. Some of them don't have it in the genes like you.
There's a chicken and egg situation. Why must the LIRs, for example, go out and get V6? Or if they've got V6 because we've been making a lot of noise about it, where's the incentive to deploy it? Now, I'm sure I've discussed this with a few people in the room before, but I would be interested in a new AFRINIC policy. And the AFRINIC policy would go something along the lines of, if you have no IPv numbering resources from AFRINIC, then you can just talk to them, doesn't matter how, V4, V6, Telex, or whatever that AFRINIC can accept. If you have V4 and you have no V6, then the only thing you can ask them for numbering resources is a V6. You cannot ask them for more V4 until you have V6. And then once an LIR has a V6, the only way he can ask for more V4 is over a working V6 connection from their address space, which has already been previously allocated to them from AFRINIC. Would that work?
That's an interesting proposal.
Can we make an extension to this? Can we close the AFRINIC mailing lists to non-V6 address mailers? What? I think this is the most brilliant idea you've had all day.
No, I can't do that.
AFRINIC are in the room, they can guide us to that. But hold that thought. Let's hear from Jan, who's been at the mic.
Well, Jan, George, you just removed the IPv4 address from the AFRINIC mail server, do you, right? And you don't close anything, right?
Exactly. It's so easy.
Okay, so my thought was, it was sparked when you discussed about this transition and translation technologies and the pain of all of them. And for the full disclosure, I am at the co-author of one of them, that being A+P, address plus port, that today results in MAP-E, MAP-T, and lightweight 4/6 and things like this. Back in time, we needed to give the carrier grade net sort of like an alternative. So we thought about A+P with Randy Bush, Nokia, Juniper guys, and my other co-authors. But what happened back then was, today we have 13 different transition technologies. All of them suck. Let's make the one that will replace them all. And after we were done, we had 14 transition mechanisms. Right? But to a little bit explain why we went down this path. IPv6 was meant to replace IPv4 and was meant to be deployed way before IPv4 would deplete. That means that would be quite a logical and natural and painless transition from one protocol to another. But unfortunately, we all collectively failed. And the sign of our failure is today around 20 transition mechanisms that nobody really understands how to use them. So we need to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, no, I don't fault anybody halfway down the line for writing a transition mechanism or trying to improve them. My simple point is that had no one come out with a transition mechanism, the problem is that once there was one, there were always going to be more. And it's not even the transition mechanism. It started with the person who invented NAT. And the problem with the NAT paradigm is made worse by the fact that in the late 90s, Cisco came out with a Cisco PIX, and it wasn't selling too well. So they really needed to kind of promote it, and they went, well, what does it do? Well, it does NAT. So they went out and they decided to call NAT a security mechanism. And they sold the world a lie. And
I thought NAT was a firewall.
And so NAT became synonymous with security. So now when you're trying to do V6, you've got an even bigger problem, because people are like, I'm losing my security that's coming from NAT. There's no security in NAT. And so NAT was a bad idea in the first place because it was a transition, or it was a means of extending V4, and I think that anything that artificially extends V4 is damaging. It created a lie about security which too many people bought into, which now makes V6 harder to deploy. And then people started inventing transition mechanisms for 6 to 4, and to make it even worse, somebody has now even written 6 to 6 NAT and needs to be shot for it. You know, it's a big problem. But yes, the 20 plus years we failed. We did, for all the trying. And I also put that blame squarely on the vendors. I put that blame on operators that didn't look at the technology soon enough and demand what they really needed it for. No MPLS, for example. Why are the operators not screaming at the vendors and screaming at the IETF 10 years ago? But yes, those transition mechanisms hurt us.
Now, I want to ask you a question related to vendors and what you've talked about the IETF. The IETF, people say, I've had your gripe about the IETF. Depending on who you talk to, they'll say that's not a bug, it's a feature of the IETF. As Liquid, beyond talking to your vendors, to push the changes that you want, the MPLS and so on, have you also considered sending people from Liquid, from this region, to the IETF to participate or join a couple of mailing lists? And the reason I ask that is because every time I manage to go to an IETF, there are questions towards, they want to get more people from the region to participate, because they feel that in a couple of working groups that I've, the people I've talked to, they don't have the voice from the region, so they don't know whether the stuff that's coming out of the IETF is actually scalable in Africa. So as Liquid, as a big ISP in the region, have you guys considered possibly sending people to these meetings to represent your views, represent your, put your complaints to some of these working groups?
Okay, so firstly, are people in Liquid reading the IETF mailing lists? Yes, definitely. And in fact, recently when I was talking to people about coming into the innovation side in Liquid, I made it very clear that part of the job description was to read everything that ever comes out of the IETF, because I need to know what's coming in order to innovate and to develop, etc. Sending people there? No, we haven't done that yet. It's something that we will consider doing in the future, but at the moment, because of the deep relationships that we have with the vendors, it's easier, less time consuming, less expensive to push that stuff to the vendors. I think there is an assumption that because an operator like us isn't standing at a microphone in the IETF, that our voices aren't getting heard. I would argue that our voices are getting heard, because I see some of the things we're saying appearing in mails to IETF mailing lists from the vendors. It's just far, far, far easier. I see the point about people getting onto the mailing lists and bringing the African message to the IETF. But my concern is if I send someone to the IETF at the moment and they walk into the political mess that is the IETF and find the vendor playground that seems to exist there, they'll go the first time. Are they ever going to return? And I'd rather ensure that by the time I do send people, they know what they're getting into. We need to be honest about the quagmire that is the IETF at the moment. Otherwise, you're sending people and they will not be back. It would be very interesting to conduct a survey of new people who've been to the IETF in the last 3-5 years and see how many of them are still coming back. That would be a very interesting to see. What is the churn rate because of what goes on in the IETF? And I would encourage ISOC to do a survey like that, because I think it would actually be very revealing. As I say, we're reading, and believe me, if we see something on there that the vendors aren't dealing with, that we need to say something.
I think the people who need to do that survey should be the IESG or the IAB in terms of the number of people who return. And this is a question that is posted on a Facebook post, given your earlier presentation with respect to...
I'm scared. Is this on my Facebook page?
It should be on your Facebook. No, I'm not sure whether it shows up on your Facebook, but it shows because he posted it, and it shows up on my Facebook page. So it's a question from Michaela Abrahamson from Deutsche Telecom. And the question is to Andrew, would you care to comment on why you're going the NAT 64 plus 464 XLAT route? On most fixed line deployment, people are doing MAP or DS Lite.
Wow. Firstly, at this point, I'm not going to get into that technically. But to the guy who asked that question, contact me offline and we can have this debate. But what I will say about that question is thank you very much for the question, because it illustrates a point. 20 plus transition mechanisms. We can't even agree which one to use. I have heard the DS Lite argument, and it comes out of one vendor, and you've got the NAT 64 coming out of another vendor. These things are again vendor interests. If I look at what happened in certain people who now work for other organizations in one particular vendor, there was a particular guy who said, we don't need V6, we're going to concentrate on carrier grade NAT, etc., etc. And well, as a result, that particular vendor fell very far behind. Another vendor said, we want DS Lite. Another vendor said, well, NAT 64 makes more sense. Again, this comes down to the fact that everybody's got different views and the mechanisms work equally well. I'm not sure that I agree that most people are going DS Lite. I'd need to see objective figures to actually see that. I know a lot of people who are concentrating on the NAT 64 464 XLAT route, and I've seen it on the V6 providers list. People are using it, there's no question about it. So we also need to be very careful about generalizations like that. As to the actual technology choice, that's a long, long discussion, and I'm quite prepared to have it offline, but I don't think we've got the time to get into it. But I would say, choose the translation mechanism that is easiest and works best for you. We've been through enough in this industry with operating system religion, with IGP religion, with vendor religion. We do not need to get into transition mechanism religion. Please. Let's avoid that.
We already went there, don't worry.
Mark, do you want to add anything?
Not my interest.
He's staying out of the war.
That was a question, comment.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. I hope what I'm going to ask, it's not necessarily been covered, but it's in relation to the IETF. it has been indicated that there is low representation of the African continent within the IETF. But we understand that there's a lot of cost implications in terms of local people being able to attend, which is one of the limiting factors resulting in that lack of participation within the IETF. Because for one, they want a certain level of skills, which are highly technical. But now, since we are working within the IG ecosystem, we're talking about a multi-stakeholder approach, not necessarily focusing on only technical people, policy-making people, business, government. They should also get a fair chance of participating. But the limitation, as I've said, is the cost of participation. Is there any way that these underrepresented regions can be supported to actually participate within the IETF? Because it's a discussion that has been going on within ISOC, but ISOC on its own, I don't think it can actually cover the entire region. We need to see different people playing a role in ensuring that underrepresented regions are able to make it to the IETF, because once that happens, it's easy for them to share information and make sure that there is greater participation, be it mailing lists, but the actual on-site participation, it's much powerful as opposed to this long-distance online type of participation, whereas you get limited exposure into what is going on within the IETF. Thanks.
Thanks, Dato. Let me answer that one quickly. So, IETF participation from the region, yes, it is very, there are costs involved, going to the IETF meeting. And for Africa, there's a fellowship program that ISOC has been running for the past couple of years. We still run it. And we've had we've had fellows who've gone and actually done very good levels of participation at the IETF. People who've actually gone and actually produced RFC documents at the IETF. However, there's a challenge with fellowships. Fellowships can only send so many people to an IETF meeting. It's something that does not scale in the long run. To give you an example, per year, I would say the fellows we're able to send is about maybe from the Africa region, maybe 5, 6, 7. What you're trying to do with the initiative, Africa IETF initiative, is to encourage other organizations, academia, ISPs, and so on, to also take up the role of sending a few people to the IETF. For example, Liquid, a big ISP, they could probably afford to send a few people to the IETF.
I want to comment on this briefly.
Before you do, let me finish and answer the question. Academia, the research education networks, they could probably have a budget to send people to the IETF. In Brazil, there is a task force there for advising the government about issues around the technology and the internet. They put aside a budget for academia to send professors to the IETF to keep the government informed about the IETF and the standards that are coming out, that sort of thing. So in the region, this Africa region in particular, participation is low, awareness is also low. That's another problem. Participation is low because of, people can't go there. Awareness is also low. People don't even know that you can actually join a working group today and start being active on the mailings, or even just do something like an IETF viewing hub, whereby you just sit down in a room like this and follow what's going on at the IETF. So I'll quickly close on this and say we have a mailing list called IETF Africa mailing list. You can join. We're trying to get more people involved, get more people, informed about what the IETF is, get more people around, participating around the IETF. We held a hackathon that in Nairobi. Hackathon was just a room like this where we did something around the IETF. It's beginning to take more traction. So it's something we're trying to address.
I want to say this as well, though. So firstly, an ISP is probably going to be sending their own people if they're going to be sending anyone, so you've got to convince them to do that first. And in large companies, a lot of the people are involved in doing R&D, a lot of it, and feeding it back, again, through the vendors. So that is happening. They're not, and that expense is rather being funneled into the actual R&D inside the organization. The other thing is that with regards to African ISPs that are not sending their people because they don't have money. I'm about to get a little bit controversial here. Here's a fact.
Again?
The bandwidth costs in Africa are some of the highest in the world. The margins being made by some of these ISPs selling that bandwidth are some of the highest in the world. When you go to London and Hurricane Electric is selling transit for 10 cents a meg, but I'm seeing bandwidth being sold in certain countries on this continent for in excess of $900 a meg, and people are still buying it. For those ISPs to turn around and go, we don't have our money to send people to the IETF, sorry, I don't buy it. I'm sorry, I simply do not buy that argument. Because the fact is there are plenty of ISPs out there that are making plenty of money. I get it for the students. I get it for the people on the ground, but I don't get it for the ISPs that want to make that claim while charging what they're charging.
Good point. First Alan, then Moko.
Hi, this is Alan Barrett. I would like to distinguish between participating in the IETF and attending the IETF. You can participate on the mailing lists without attending. There's really very little barrier to that. If there's some technology whose development or standardization that you care about, then find the right mailing list, subscribe to it, read it all, and if you have input, then contribute. You do not need to spend money in travel. And in fact, I would recommend that you don't spend money in travel until after you've already spent 6 months or a year participating in the mailing lists.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks. Actually, what I was going to say is exactly along the same lines, because quite frankly, if you look on the basis of a return on investment, if an operator on this continent has $5,000 to send people to go and scale up, I don't think an IETF event for the very first time is the best use of those funds. And quite frankly, if you step into an IETF and you have not been following the mailing list for at least 3 months, you are going to waste time. We should go into, quite frankly, I hope you guys are taking that into your fellowships selection process. If someone hasn't been on that mailing list for at least a certain period of time, they're just going to waste time. Because first time you step on an IETF, you're drinking from a hose. You are not going to learn anything. You don't go to the IETF to learn. And so if you haven't built the intellectual foundations long before, you can't do anything at the IETF.
Yeah.
And then secondly, one of the things that really caught my attention was, like, recently when the Kenyan Supreme Court said, we are overturning elections, and all the international observers, everything was cool and fine and free and fair. We've got to ask the question, is this so we have to be part of the IETF, something that is going to be beneficial for the continent now? Or is it simply because we are being told that we need to be part of it? I think that's a conversation we should have. Otherwise, we are not, commanders of our own futures. Now, to be fair, it is important, and I think for every person, even if someone is willing to pay the bills for you to go to the IETF, until you find something beneficial personally to continue going to the IETF, it's simply going to be, let me go and take a vacation. And I'll give you an example. I did not have the interest to continue going to an IETF until, when we started creating Afrinics training program, we would create, training materials based on vendor white papers and textbooks. And then when we went out into the field, we see, conflicts because, it's a vendor's thing, it's a vendor's perspective. And then when we rewrote it, version 2, we decided to go to the center line. Those were RFCs. It was only after that I went to the IETF for my first time. And then it was immediately beneficial because I could have people guide me on what that center line was. And also because we knew what that center line was, I know I and my team, we regularly are on the mailing list. So unless there is some personal interest, and which most of the time I really don't see for most guys who are around here, it's just not sustainable. So the question is this something that we need to do as Africans right now?
Okay, so let me start first with your first point, fellowships. I'm on the fellowship committee selection for the Africa region. If you apply and you do not prove that you've been on any of the mailing lists, you're out immediately. That's like one of the first criteria we check. Which mailing list you have to show which mailing list that you're signed up to, and at least you've been there for some time. That's the first thing. Second, to your point about is it something we need now? Let me give you a small story. I went to an IETF meeting recently, I won't say which one, and I met some of the guys working on a protocol. And the protocol they're defining was based or pegged on the fact that an internet user will be no more than 2 hops away from the content. Now, for the Africa region, we know that's not possible. How many hops does it take before we get to Europe? I don't know, what, 6, 7 hops maybe, before you get to something on the other side?
Depends where you are. Mombasa, 2.
Not everyone is in Mombasa. Not everyone is in Mombasa. But the point is, it's something that would work in that region. It's not something that would work, if that protocol, whatever it is, or whatever app will run on that, it's not something that would be useful for us in this region. So when you go for these IETF meetings, they ask, where are the Africans? We don't have the voice of the people from the region. And it boils down to, participation. Not many people go because it's expensive to go. Some people, the people who should be going, like the people who work at the ISPs and the NOGs, and sorry, not the NOGs, the NRENs and so on, they don't go because they're not aware that they can actually put in a voice and say, okay, what you're proposing is actually not good for reason A, B, C, D. So that's what we're doing right now. Now, IETF is not for everyone. Okay, we're not saying if you're doing studies on this, you can just show up to the IETF and contribute. No, the plan or the objective of this initiative is long term. It's not something that will help the region today, but it will help the region in 5-10 years when these protocols that are being thought of today are actually, for example, IPv6 is, when was IPv6 produced? What, 88, 89? 10, 15, 20 years is when it's now a really big deal. But as an IETF, RFC, document production, it's produced way, long ago. So the internet of tomorrow, or the next 5-10 years, is being designed now. So if we don't make the right noise to the right people to make the awareness known, we might be left back at the region, which is why there's an initiative. And I believe some of you on the list, please join the list, add people, make people more aware to the problem and get the awareness. That's what we're trying to say.
I will just ask you this. The internet of tomorrow is being designed today. Is it really being designed in the IETF? Or is it being designed in the labs of the big operators and the labs of the vendors? I had a vendor who told me the other day that I shouldn't bother asking for alpha and beta code to test new stuff because all the new features were dictated by the top 25 top 25 customers, and well, I wasn't one of them. That's what they said to me, to my face. Yeah, it didn't go so well for them, but that's the attitude. And, as Mukum said, when somebody goes to the IETF, if people have got to choose how they spend money, if you've got a guy like yourself, or myself, or some of the really technically clued up people in this room, great, send them to the IETF. But the younger guys, the guys who need to learn, rather than spending the $5,000 sending someone to an IETF, go and buy a lab router and let him play on it. Because he's going to learn and he's going to develop on that lab router. He can read the IETF on the mailing list and he can answer it. But don't waste the money on the travel budget because he's going to get lost and he's going to walk out of there with a week. A lab router is going to give him 2 or 3 years to learn. And then he can take everything from the mailing lists and apply it. But to send people over there who don't have lab equipment, who don't have an ability to sit and learn and play and test, that doesn't help anyone and it does this continent a disservice.
We've taken this conversation from IPv6 to IETF, but let me answer that. The reason that's not happening is going back to the awareness. The reason that young guy who's coming out from the university or college is not doing that and, looking at mailing lists from the, the working groups and trying to do something, he doesn't even know where all these things are coming from. The university curriculum that's being taught, and now we're really diverting, but the director of the Africa Regional Bureau, Dr. Michaela, he's based in Addis, and he's actually trying to get universities to include IETF curriculum in university studies because it's not there. So it's a problem that's affecting, we're trying to solve the issue. We can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. That's why we're trying to get the help from the other regions. From the other parts. So I'm being told I have 5 minutes. Jan, please speak.
Hello, Jan here. I have a direct reply on your lab versus IETF thing, and yeah, I agree with you. I was born and raised in the operational waters. I spent 20 years in operations, building also labs and things like this, and kind of agree with you, and to some extent disagree, because me being a lab guy, I like to test and experiment on everything, on new technologies, new inventions, new stuff. And what I find quite useful at actually going to the IETF is you attend the working group sessions, and then comes people with some presentations of how they would like to solve several problems. And the rule of thumb at the IETF is rough consensus and running code. So these people brings prototypes, running code to show that their idea would work. And I love listening to this stuff, and sometimes wondering on what kind of crack these people is. But then I have the opportunity to go and find these people in the hallways or ask the question on the mic and say, hey, can you please explain it a little bit more to me? Where is your code? How can I put it into my lab? How can I see if your thing actually works? How can I develop your idea? How can I help you? So this is maybe, and sometimes it becomes quite interesting, because you get to test stuff that, dude, you would not invent it if not smoking something really, 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 really strong. But things works, right? Things works. Thanks, Jan. I think now, just closing this IETF issue, and then I want to invite all of you to give closing remarks on the IPv6 thing. The mailing list is there. We're not saying that it's something that's going to be solved now, but it's something we need to talk about now. And I'm really happy to see that people are talking about the IETF in the region. This has not been the case for the past 2-3 years. And we've been talking to people about the IETF. This year we tried to change tack and try to do something about IETF. So we created the mailing list, we did the hackathons, we've talked to the NOGs, we've talked to the entrants. Interest is peaking. Yeah, but we are fully aware that it's not something that's going to be done, this year, next year, and so on. It's a long-term plan, and it's not something that ISOC can do alone. No way. For example, the hackathon that we did, it was ISOC and Afrinic who managed to put that together. What I would like to see, and I think what's missing in the region, is when you go to an IETF meeting, yes, the vendors are there, the big boys are there, yeah, the vendors are there, but there are also people who come from, ISPs, they're running big boxes like you, and lots of switches and routers. They want to see certain features there, and they're there trying to make, their voices heard. I have not met, when we organize meetings like this, we call them Africa IETF meetings at the IETF, we only get about 10 Africans out of a total population of about, 1,500 people from the meeting. So there is a problem. And it's something that we're trying to solve. We need everyone's participations, everyone's, playing a part, raising the awareness. And I think it's in time we will see the benefits, but it's something we at least need to address now. So I hope we can close the IETF issue. Maybe we could continue that off list. I want to invite both of you to give closing remarks on IPv6, not IETF, on IPv6. What would be your message to, the people in the region who have not yet moved on to IPv6? What would you tell them? Would you have someone here there? What would you tell them in terms of long-term planning for their business?
Okay, as a final comment, firstly, I would say stop treating IPv6 as something different. It's a part of the network. It just is. start treating it that way. The same way you treat your IGP, your BGP, your V. Actually, no, forget your BGP because I've seen how people treat BGP. But, you know, just generally as part of your network. And for those of you who don't want to move into today, and I'm not talking about the future because IPv6 is today and not the future, I say to you, in a year, 2 years, thank you for your customers. I will welcome them with open arms.
I was going to do something even shorter. I was just going to say 96 more bits, but there's no magic.
That's a good one. Okay. Any final questions from the audience, comments? Oh, Tato has something. Okay. I hope it's not IETF. IETF off list. We'll talk about IETF later.
I'm not expecting an answer, so you don't have to stress that much. I think for me, I don't think it's something else besides what you don't want to hear. I've heard everyone commenting around the IETF issue, and I agree with everyone, and it's not a problem with that. So the only thing I'd ask for consideration for those who are able to actually take it forward, it's that we have institutions. I'm just giving an example, like ICANN, for instance, which is a bit technical for a lot of people. It's very difficult to understand, but they make efforts to actually come locally to countries within the IGFs to make themselves known, which is a platform for people to actually get interest and start participating within, which is one of the strategies that I feel that can be deployed to enable people to actually start participating within. Because if we're talking about lack of participation, and on the other side, we're looking at low awareness. In order to improve on low awareness, we need to improve on participation. Because when you're talking about the ISPs being able to attend the IETF, and then we need to look at the dynamics in terms of the type of companies that exist. Are they representative? The type of voices, are they representative of the region? Because the more we have diversity, I think it's the better, because it will be more inclusive for everyone. That's all. Thanks very much.
Megan, maybe the next ION should be on IETF only. Divert the topic. Okay. A lady, we must let her speak. You must let us speak. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Thembelihle from the Durban University of Technology. I'm an IT student. Yeah. We were here to listen to everything that has been said, and we've learned a lot. I must say that half of the things that we've heard, some of us know nothing about. So, just in short, if you can just advise us with regards to career paths, because in our field of study, we've been exposed to software development and touched a bit of in networks. So if you could advise us so that we could, next time we come to one of these conferences, we'd know what is being spoken about. Because we do know what IPv6 is, but we don't have a broad knowledge. We don't have broad knowledge of what it is about. So if you can advise us, like from where to from here, what field we can go into. Maybe if you can go into Cisco, N+.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an answer you're probably not expecting. And before I do that, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about me.
Okay.
I have no matric certificate. I left school when I was 16, and I walked out because I realized that I was never going to get taught what I wanted to know by anybody else. And I had to go out and get a head start on the experience. And what I found over the years is that to get that base knowledge, I don't want to say go Google it, because that's the wrong answer, but it comes very close. It's about reading, it's about research, it's about time, it's about effort. It's the 2 o'clock in the morning nights, it's the passion and the drive, because that's what keeps you in this industry. Yes, you can go and do a Cisco qualification and it'll give you the background. But here's something to realize about vendor certifications. You're not an engineer with vendor certifications. You're certified in syntax. A truly good engineer knows his protocols. He's gone on the internet and he's read and read and read.
Yeah.
He's used a Linux box, which you can get hold of anywhere, and Googled around for network simulation and then applied it and tried and read everything from the basics to the most advanced until he knows the protocols.
Yeah.
And then after that, your vendor certifications give you the syntax if you want it. But a true network engineer is not trained by a vendor. They're trained in the protocols and can use anything. So my advice is get on there and be prepared for long nights and just start reading and reading and reading. Don't wait for anybody else to give it to you, because they're not going to.
Okay, so Google must be my best friend.
Yes.
Thank you so
Mark, you want to say
I
anything,
just
or-
want to make a little tweak to your just Google it. It's just Deploy360 it. It's the program that we're responsible for. So internetsociety.org/Deploy360 has a treasure trove of educational materials. So you can start there and then move to the Googs.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let me add one more thing. As the Internet Society, we do have a number of online courses that teach about networking, system administration, and they are fully online, and they also include hands-on online labs. So see me after this, and I'll give you, all the information you need about those. Okay.
And you can talk to me if you ever need lab stuff. I've got some stuff available, where we can help people out if they're looking to play with specific things.
Yeah, that's good. That's good here.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I think the panel deserves a round of applause. Thank you very much for your time. I'll now hand over back to Megan.